in the property market and sector, and is very, very well qualified as well. So Graham, you should be able to share your screen, or I can share your pack if you would like me to. I can whatever's easiest for you, Graham.
If you're happy to do it, then there's probably less chance of it going wrong, because I'm not too seasoned at this. So
okay, no,
let's do that.
Okay, it's not a problem. I had it prepared earlier, so I'll just
I'll happily try, but
no. Well, it's up to you. It's am I sharing? No, I'm not sharing. I'll share. Could you see that? Okay, right. So here we go. Let's go to here. Let's go to here, and let's go to here. Okay, you should be able to. Can you see that, Graham?
Yeah, perfect.
So you're very welcome, Graham, and look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much. So hello everybody. As Chris has introduced me, I'm Graham Kinnear. First off, thank you for inviting me. It's I'm very pleased to meet with you, albeit virtually. So I want to talk about, or I've decided to talk about some of the mistakes that I've entitled it the mistakes of property investors, but it's probably more a sort of self-confession that most of these mistakes I've made myself. But in addition to that, I think they're the commonalities of what I see in others. But just by way of a bit of background about me, I did surveying at university. I used to say I graduated before the last recession, but it's now the recession before the last recession. So I graduated in the early 1990s. There were very few graduate surveying jobs available at that stage. And so I ended up as an estate agent in the early 90s. And I worked for other people for probably 4 or 5 years. And 3 redundancies by the time I was 25 kind of gave me the idea that maybe I should do my own thing. And on that basis, really, it wasn't a leap at all, because effectively I'd never had a secure job. So I wasn't really risking a great deal by trying things on my own. So I went self-employed and ended up opening an estate agency in East Kent, which is effectively, I think, how I met Chris in the first place. And that grew to 4 offices, and I ran that for about 11 years, and then that was sold to Countrywide in 2014. For the last 7 or so years of running that business, I also had a law firm which specialised in dealing with problem tenants, which provided a nationwide service of dealing with tenant eviction and generally landlord and tenant matters. And latterly, we did tenant referencing as well. And then whilst all of that was going on for the entire duration from the mid-1990s onwards, I was a landlord, I was a property investor as well. Following the sale of my business in 2014, I did have a sort of idea of semi-retirement, but that didn't last too long. And in 2015, I set up my current business, which is building surveying. So we do building surveying, we do surveys, party wall matters, energy assessments, all that sort of thing. So that's a bit of background for me. So without further ado, Chris, if you could move the next one on, that would be good.
Could I just check, Graham, are you happy to take questions as you go through?
Yeah, no, I'm happy that it's as interactive as anyone wants it to be. So if anyone's got any questions, shout, wave, chat, whatever is appropriate in this digital world. And
I've got one, Graham. Which area do you cover now with the surveying, please?
Well, it depends on what sort of surveying. So for party wall matters, we cover the whole country now. For SAP assessments for new build and newly converted dwellings, we cover the whole of the country. And for things like project management and contract administration and that sort of thing, we just cover Kent.
Oh, whole of Kent, big area though.
Yeah, I mean, most of our project management stuff is sort of the east side of Maidstone, but certainly we wouldn't go beyond Kent, because effectively for the project management side, it is me rather than colleagues, and really, given the amount of time that you need to attend site, it needs to be geographically fairly local for you to be.
So was you based at Maidstone, or are you further east?
So Ramsgate is our Kent office.
Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha. Thank you.
Very welcome. So the first one, these are in no particular order, and I could probably have come up with many more, but I'm sure most of you want to get to bed tonight, so I've restricted it to what I think are the ones that sort of most readily came to my mind. Now, the first one to my mind is that people, there's many people out there that don't really seem to know what it is that they want to be doing, and I think that can take a number of formats. So I think there's some people that think, well, I should maybe be doing something in property because, you know, I've looked at the Sunday Times Rich list and quite a lot of people on there have an interest in property. From my point of view, I don't think that's enough. I think if you're going to dedicate a lot of hours and a lot of time at something, I think you need to be really passionate about it. And so I suppose maybe that's the first lesson that I would leave you with, is that you really need to make sure that what you're about to or currently spending an awful lot of time on is something that actually you genuinely want to do. From my point of view, I always wanted to do property. I think I was sort of half interested from early teenage years, very seriously interested from about 16 plus, and have never really thought about doing anything different. I suppose where I perhaps have fallen into this category is in terms of sort of selecting strategies or selecting direction within property. And I think that's something that, having invested for frighteningly a quarter of a century now, it's something that I think it's useful to continually look at, because I think it changes. So for sake of argument, when I was younger, if someone had said, what's the driver for you? Is it capital values, capital growth, or is it yields? I would have probably said both. But actually, if I'd sat and thought about it, one of the principal initial drivers for me for investing in property was because I'd never had a job long enough to get on their pension scheme, and I was self-employed, and I basically would have had no provision for my retirement. So my answer probably should have been, it's all about the income. And it would be now, but I think it's a useful one to sort of continually appraise, because I think if even subconsciously you're perhaps going in a direction which isn't the direction you really want, I think that will impact the amount of effort and dedication that you put to the cause. And I suppose the people that seem to really enjoy what they're doing and consequently enjoy the greater perhaps successes are the ones probably who have reflected on some past experiences and thought, what worked, what did I enjoy, which were the bits that I didn't like. I mean, the case in point, we've got a client that we did all of their energy surveys, and we did a lot of floor plans and bits and pieces for them in anticipation of them doing license applications. But basically, they are a student landlord. And the guy that I met, who is one of the directors, and they've got about 60 houses that are all house 4 or 5 students. And he said, the worst part of my job is dealing with students. He said, they're a nightmare, and I just don't enjoy it. And I thought to myself, well, that's a reasonably sized problem, because that's what you do. And I think this is the thing. And in other respects, you look at people that say, well, I want to invest close to home. Well, if close to home means there isn't a university, then that means no student lets. So you need to decide what's important to you, whether that's the strategy, where you want to invest, what you want to achieve, and what have you. And the quote that I found kind of, I think, encapsulates it. There's lots of quotes actually that sort of deal with this point. if you don't know what you want, you'll probably never get it, or if you chase two rabbits, you'll catch none. But I think the thing that highlights to me in my mind is if you think back of what you thought previously, it could have been different, and therefore I think you should continually sort of assess what it is that you're actually wanting from property. Assume it's property that is your thing. As I say, by all means, shout if anyone's got any questions or comments as we go. That's absolutely fine.
I was just going to say, Graham, that the passionate bit and being prepared to put the effort in makes me reflect on what Sam was saying in terms of the investor pack. So if you're really interested in what you're doing, you want to be informed, you want to do a good job, you want to have a great investment, then probably putting that pack together isn't such a chore. In fact, it would reaffirm that particular development or that particular investment. And so for me, that passion would drive a lot of what you do, and would be reflected in the quality of the work that you do, and the applications that you make, and or the planning applications you make. It would flow through everything you do, really.
And it does lead to success, because I think if you were each to think of the best sales experience, the best sales pitch you were ever subjected to, I would wager that the person that delivered what you would describe as the best pitch you've ever been given is the person who was probably the most enthusiastic about what they were selling or promoting or what have you, and the most passionate about it. And I think it's a hard emotion to put on. So I think, as I say, if you can find that's something that really does tick your boxes. And it's, it's like people say, you have this Sunday afternoon feeling that you're dreading going to work, and without sort of sounding too, happy clappy, I've genuinely never had that. You have tough days because not everything goes right, but I've never sat at home on a Sunday and dreaded the week starting again. I've genuinely always looked forward. I can say I love what I do, and always have. And I think if you can get that, then that's got to be a positive for your well-being and all these other things, definitely.
Yeah, I agree. Now, maybe you should call it the Sunday night test, in terms of how you feel for the start of the following week. So that's pretty good.
Yeah, no, I agree.
No, that's really good. I also like the two rabbits quote as well. I like that.
Yeah, someone used that. It was one of some of these things sometimes stick with you. Someone said that to me once. They said, if you chase two, you'll catch none, and it is true.
Yeah.
And I think certainly in property, the number of strategies that are out there, and people refer to this shiny penny syndrome, but I think it is very much the case. You need to laser focus on something, and and master that, but rather than trying everything, I think.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you.
Okie doke. Pop on the next slide then. Let's see what the next issue is. Now, this one, this whole business partners and joint venture partners, I find this whole environment absolutely staggering. I've done a joint venture in the past which went pretty badly wrong. I've had business partners in the past where that hasn't gone brilliantly either. But I think what staggers me most is the environment within which people seem to select people. So you see at some of these networking events, and you see posts on LinkedIn, people saying, I've seen this house in Sheffield, I need 50 grand. And all of a sudden, they're business partners. And for me, certainly on the experience that I've had, which wasn't particularly bruising or scathing, but you reflect on these things, is that not nearly enough due diligence goes into this tool. So my view is, if you're going to do it, and I understand why people do it, it's that thing that, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So I get that, but I think there needs to be a considerable amount of due diligence to understand whether the person that you're thinking of aligning with, whether the skills and experience complement your own, or whether actually they make up the skills that you're lacking. And I think, as an employer, I think if we're being very honest, one of the early mistakes that I made in employing people is I think I was subconsciously attracted to those that shared a similar view and skill set and experience to me. And I think with hindsight, that's the wrong thing to do. What I should have done is look for people that could complement my skill set and actually pick up on the bits that I'm pretty hopeless at. But I think maybe my ego got in the way and I didn't actually recognize that, the size of that void. But I think you need to look at this when you're considering joint ventures, because if the right people can add some serious value, but they need to be able to bring some skills and experience to it. I think they need to have a track record, and I think they need to be able to bring a sort of similar quantum of resource and skill set, so that you don't have that sort of impasse of, you know, one party is clearly doing more than the other. I think based on my experiences, I'd also perhaps suggest that you have someone with perhaps a limited amount of emotional baggage that they're bringing with you, and some financial stability wouldn't go amiss too. Because bear in mind, you're going to be financially linked to these people. So actually there is a genuine need for you to ensure that thing goes to plan. But I think the overriding thing is, I think you need to be absolutely comfortable that you have a sort of values alignment, you know, in terms of, you know, business ethics and integrity and all that sort of thing. Because you may have spent many years building up a reputation, but if you align with the wrong person, then that could change very quickly. And as I say, I think the mistake that I suppose I'm highlighting is that I think people perhaps select their joint venture and business partners perhaps too swiftly, and that the consequential success, if it's there, is perhaps more by luck than by judgment. So that is my note of caution for that one.
No, I think that's really, really good. I mean, my own experience has been, but people not actually even having partnership agreements at the start of working with people, and then not thinking about the exit or worst case scenarios. So if you're thinking of those things up front, I think that's really important, because it then makes sort of terminating a partnership that much easier, because you've already had that thinking. And I think also with training courses, that it's very easy to sell the benefits of, you know, working together, and there definitely are benefits of working together. You know, the whole thing about, you know, 1 + 1 equaling more than 2, I sort of agree with. But it can also be 1 + 1. 1 + 1 is less than 1, you know, because it just ends up being in a complete mess and being very destructive. So I think the points you raise are really good. One of the most interesting things, I think, you talked about values alignment, but it'd be interesting to see your thoughts about how would you approach that sort of values alignment. I mean, you know, you could use things like Myers-Briggs or the Roger Hamilton sort of assessment. You know, so there are tools out there. I just wondered what you would use, or what you've done in the past, Graham.
Well, I mean, I suppose I suppose what tools I would use now would be to have a sort of deeper understanding of that person. So in terms of what is the drivers, you know, I mean, I suppose it depends what you're joint venturing for, but for sake of argument, you know, what are the drivers? Is the interest to, you know, create and deliver amazing service, or is it just you want to get rich? Is it that you want to build something that is a legacy for your children, or is it something that you want to do 2 years, get in there, get out and go and do something else, and actually right from the start you want to sit on a beach in St. Lucia? Whereas if the other person wants to build a 30-year career with the opportunity that they can leave it to their children, there isn't an alignment there. But of course, the other thing is that people's needs and desires change over time. And so the one that some people have said to me is, they say, well, it's okay because it's not really business partners. It's basically, you know, I've got the time and the deal, and so-and-so's got the money, which is all well and good. But what often will happen when you fuse those two together is that the guy with the money actually starts to get, or the lady with the money starts to get interested in the project and thinks that it might be that they think that they can add some value. Well, that might not be compatible with whoever came forward with the deal. So the thing can change. Your point about agreements and having shareholder agreements is absolutely imperative, and it's not just the financials, it's the other side of it as well. So for sake of argument, if you have a company together with somebody and you create it so it gets to a level of X and there's no agreement between the two of you, say for that initial handshake you had in the pub at the start, then it's just normal things like, well, what happens if someone says they want to retire? What agreement have you got in terms of how the spoils of that company are divided? Because then all of a sudden you've got a situation where someone's doing all the work and someone's doing none. And if you haven't pre-decided it, or you haven't even a mechanism by which that could be decided, then presumably there's an opportunity for dispute there. It's almost like working out how to fix it before it's broken. But as I say, my view with it, I think people get into these associations far too readily, and I think that's possibly why quite a few of them don't quite go to plan.
Yeah, I can agree more. Any comments or questions for Graham on that point? I think you're talking a lot of sense, Graham, and I really agree with many of the points you made, actually. I sort of, when you said limited emotional baggage, it did make me laugh a bit, because I could only guess what that was like, but I think we all know how painful all that can be.
Yeah. No, I mean, I've just seen that comment from Seamus. That's I think that for me that encapsulates it perfectly. Because the thing is when these things do go wrong, and again, I'm calling slightly on some personal experience here, when these things do go wrong, even if they're fixable, there is an enormous cost in terms of the brain space that you devote to resolving it. And generally speaking, that's if you're lucky, because normally there's also the associated solicitors bills to go with it. And I suppose it's one of those things, the more effort and due diligence you can put in at the start, then probably the easier it's likely to be at the end.
Yeah, I think that people, and we all do, get a bit carried away with the excitement of the new project or relationship or whatever it is, but thinking about the exit, worst case scenario planning is time really well spent. So I think it's a really good point, and I think
one situation I saw, which was a classic error on its way, is two people invested in a property. One of and the idea was that it was going to get refurbished and sold, but one of them right from the start actually had the idea that they didn't want it sold, they wanted it themselves, they wanted to live in it. And so you had a situation where they did that deal because the one that wanted to live in it couldn't buy it on his own. But it's always going to go wrong, because from the start, they both want something absolutely poles apart as the end result, and that something will inevitably have to give.
Yeah. No, it's good. So it's a really, really good point.
Right. On to the next one. Right, this power team. I don't like the phrase power team, but I accept it's fairly common parlance, so I've used it there. I think my issue is twofold. I think one, people get a little bit complacent perhaps with the power team that they have or that they've put in place. And in no way am I suggesting that with regularity you should shelve the people that you've worked with and just replace them just for the fun of it, because there are few on this planet who value loyalty greater than me. But I think as your businesses develop, I think the needs of the power team change. And so I think there is a requirement for some ongoing work. So for sake of argument, historically, the work that I would pass to a solicitor would have been basic conveyancing of, a freehold or a leasehold. and that's fine. I found a chap who was great, and that worked well. But then when you start buying other things, and for sake of argument, perhaps we bought a trading bar and restaurant, so that requires a slightly different skill set. And then when my estate agency sold, that requires someone that's got some knowledge of share transfer and transferring employees and all the things that go with that. So I think as your needs change or your business changes, I think you should review your power team. But as I say, I certainly don't say just shelve them, because you should change them every 3 years and see if you can get better rates, because that would be wrong, because that is just not what I would do at all. But I think it's about making sure that they can provide the services that your business needs to. And the other one with power teams that I think many make the mistake of is I think they outsource their work too early. So there seems to be certainly that I see on sort of social media and on talking to people, that people say, well, why are you knocking up a spreadsheet showing your rents, or why are you doing your property inspections, or why are you doing this? You could just outsource that and get someone on not a lot of money, and they'll go and do that for you, and that will give you extra time to do whatever it is that you need to do. And I think that a lot of people outsource when actually they haven't got anything else that they could be doing that would add any greater value than taking on that task themselves. And so I think they're spending money unnecessarily. So I think that the outsourcing should work on the basis where it's genuinely the case that your achievable hourly rate is way in excess of what you would need to pay someone to do some of these tasks for you. And unless or until your hourly rate is such and you've got a quantum of work that means it's not just the case that you could do what you normally do and you could do these tasks at a weekend, I don't see the need to outsource them. I also don't see the need. I also think it's dangerous to outsource some tasks regardless. So for sake of argument, if you're talking about, a 6 monthly check on your properties, I personally would never outsource that, because you would run the risk that whoever went out and had a look, if they missed some dry rot, then regardless of how much you saved, by the time you got round there the following year, that would have cost you more than you'd have thought that you'd save. So I think there's some tasks that just shouldn't be outsourced, period. I think you should take ownership and know yourself. But I think for others, I think the mistake is that people outsource too early. Interestingly, if we're talking about my own failings, mine isn't that. Mine's that I find it enormously difficult to delegate anything. So I'm kind of at the opposite end of that spectrum, but it's a failure nonetheless. But I suppose I'm doing something in that I recognise it. I don't know I can fix it, but I do recognise it.
I think it is a struggle. The whole delegation thing can be really difficult. So you have the delegation, which is sort of like abdication, which is this is all a bit too tricky. I'll just park it over there. I'll give it to somebody else to do, and they'll just have to do it. But that can go horribly wrong. So if you don't understand it yourself, how can you possibly know if somebody else is doing it properly? I must admit, I'm definitely in the camp of, and I do get other people to do our property inspections, because it's just not something that that we do. The only thing I would say is that on the subject of the HMO, so the very first HMO we had, Lisa and I, we managed that ourselves for the first 6 months, so that we had some experience of running the HMO. We knew sort of what was involved, and sort of knew it can be a little bit tricky. And Julie, who's on the call, will tell us all the legal requirements there are for running the HMO, which are significant. But that, again, we've outsourced, and we get a letting agent to do our HMO management for us, again on the basis that our time is sort of better spent elsewhere. But I think it's a difficult balance to hit. I think to grow a business, you absolutely need to understand how to delegate, but to delegate properly and with knowledge. And so you've still got that control. Yeah, so you can still manage without actually doing all the work itself. So it's a tricky one, Graham. But so you don't want to keep on to stuff too long. You don't want to be doing it too much yourself. And at the same time, because if you take on too much yourself, you just become either a busy idiot, or you won't do everything properly because you'll be you'll be overloaded. You won't be able to do everything. So it is a difficult balance.
And can I just say, you're going to have to turn me down, Chris. I think it's okay to delegate it. Can you turn my... Sorry, we're just having a bit of a domestic here. I can still hear myself. Okay. I think it's okay to pass jobs off to other people and to delegate, as long as you know how to do it yourself. I think and you know what you expect from each task. And I'm not saying give everything, because I agree with you. I don't think everything should be passed off to VAs or assistants or whatever, or letting agents. But I think you shouldn't ever pass anything off to anyone else to do, even Chris. If I don't know how to do it myself, then I shouldn't, or if I've not done it myself, then I don't know sort of what the outcome should be, then I shouldn't be passing it on to anyone else. And that's where we've fallen foul of that in the past. So now we don't give anything to anyone else unless we know what we want from that, or what we're going to get from that. So with an inspection, yes, we do get our letting agents to do the inspections, but we know exactly what we're looking for. And we ask, we can imagine what Chris is like. So he asked many, many questions. We have a list of things. I do, for our single lets, I do all my inspections myself. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I do agree with a lot of what you're saying. With an HMO, I never want to run an HMO again, but that's another story. But I think we've done it all, and then you can pass it on to other people. I don't think you can delegate anything, or you shouldn't delegate anything until you've done it yourself. That's what I found in the past. So I agree with what you're saying, but no,
I think it's a fair comment.
I'm going to mute myself again now.
Well done. Okay, Lisa, thank you. I couldn't agree with you more. Brilliant point, Lisa. Brilliant, absolutely fantastic. Any other points?
Extra smarty points for me then.
I think the other thing is in terms of who is part of that power team, and I think it's if you read some of these books, they sort of list out that it's a planning consultant, the architect, and the surveyor, and the etc. But they're not necessarily all pertinent to your particular business. So for sake of argument, if you're remodeling existing ex-local authority apartments or something, then there's a fair argument that you're unlikely to need a central London firm of chartered architects. And I think it's about understanding what it is you need and then putting an appropriate team in place.
I made a note about your sort of team changes as your objectives change, but also geography. So we've found that sort of fairly recently that sort of geography changed, and so we needed a different team because our geography changed, or we included a different area. So I think that was a really good point.
But I think also I don't think people perhaps do enough due diligence in terms of who they pick and why. I mean, certainly from we run quite a few construction projects, and I would say probably less than half of the people that appoint us for a construction project ever asked to look at a project that we've done, which I find really bizarre. I find it really weird. If you're on the cusp of spending significant amounts of money, and you're basing it on, well, you've been told that we've done it before or something, but I think there would be nothing more normal than saying, well, what if you just finished? Could we go and have a look at it? Or have you done anything similar to this that we could go and have a look at? And I would say that those that do probably number 50% at max. Which I
Wow.
find.
I suppose it also gives you more confidence from in the client, if the client's asking the right questions of you, in terms of your confidence in them as a client.
Yeah, I think so. But I think so. I mean, generally speaking, the most enjoyable relationships of that nature are when the client is invested in the building as well, because of course they'll see you'll feed off their emotion, their excitement as it all starts to come to life, rather than someone who's a bit more remote and actually might come and see at the end, or might actually not really be that interested. It's more transactional for them.
Yeah.
But I suppose they'll work for all the same.
So it's sort of more about working in partnership with people rather than just being a supplier of a service or a good, really.
Yeah, I think so. And I think also as a building takes shape, inevitably you start to feel differently about it. And of course, that normally results in the client wanting to make some changes and do things slightly differently. And so I think if they're quite invested in the project from early on, they're more likely to have what they wanted at the end of it. I think.
Yeah. But it makes this common sense, really. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Right. Let's move on to the next one. This one, I think I see this quite a lot. So I think people with some regularity buy the wrong thing, and I think broadly it's down to either a sort of overriding emotional drive for a purchase, or it's a lack of due diligence. But I think it's one that people need to really try and address, because if you buy the wrong thing, you've really got a mountain to climb to turn the thing into a success. And where I think I highlight people have gone wrong or go wrong is a lack of understanding of the numbers. Now, whether that's in terms of what you think the end value would be, or what you think the construction costs will be getting there, or what you think the professional fees that you might incur, etc., etc. But it is imperative that you understand these before you've bought the building, not afterwards, because it may be the difference between you being glad that you bought it or really wishing that you hadn't. I think the other thing that I think is potentially dangerous, though I've seen a number of people pull it off successfully, is investing way out of your area. I think you need a really good understanding of the area that you're sticking your money in terms of the market demand, who are the local employers, what's happening, etc., etc. And I don't necessarily, I think absolutely it's not possible to gain that insight by going to view half a dozen houses and then putting in an offer on one. So whether it's the case that you know people in the area and you studied the area, or you've got hold of a really good managing agent and you can pick their brain or what have you. But as I say, if you buy the wrong property, you're going to be working really, really hard just to sort of come out of it without incurring too much pain. And that's the one that I think is a commonly made mistake. I haven't made this one particularly myself. I've bought things where it's probably fair to say I didn't hugely understand the market for them. So I think I mentioned earlier I bought a bar and restaurant coincidentally about 6 months before the 2008 recession. But I think with hindsight, I didn't particularly understand the restaurant business. Though in my defence, I bought it knowing who the operator was going to be, that effectively we kit this thing out and then we had an operator there. So the risk was very well mitigated. And I think it's certainly fair to say that without that, I wouldn't have bought it. But as I say, I think it's about due diligence and having a really deep understanding about what you're doing, because just getting lucky can happen, but it won't happen all the time.
Yeah, I think just a rise in market has saved many a developer just because they, just happened to, time of the market was
But
good.
yeah, it has, and I mean, I think for many an appearee on Homes Under the Hammer has been saved by exactly that, the market movement. But what is frightening is I remember certainly the early sort of 2004s, 5s, 6s. I remember seeing development appraisals where they'd worked out their GDV, allowing for the market to go up during the construction phase.
Mm.
And that always looked to me as being a little bit brave to include that, because that should be the icing on the cake. That shouldn't be part of what makes the numbers work. But as I say, I've never seen it since, but certainly up to the last recession, I saw it more than once.
Wow. You talked about getting the numbers right, sort of end value, professional fees, that sort of thing. I thought you was also going to mention about contingency and whether people include contingency or sufficient contingency in their planning.
Well, I think there should be a contingency in there, but I think if you get the numbers broadly right, then it's more a sort of mopping up funds for incidentals and the sort of stuff that you couldn't have guessed. But I think what it shouldn't do is save you. I think it's the numbers need to be right in the first place. I think the contingency is useful, certainly from a contractor's point of view, because effectively it can pick up a minor difference in terms of what was initially thought and what was ended up as, without that sort of becoming in any way adversarial with the client. But it shouldn't be a number that saves you. It should just be.
But do you not feel that, particularly as newbies, they need that contingency? Because it's got to be something. I mean, we still use contingency anyway when we're working out our figures. But I think for anyone that's new to this, they're going to have to. They don't know the figures. They don't know the numbers. They haven't got that experience. They're going to need to use that contingency.
Yeah, I mean, my view would be that they should get someone to do the figures for them, because I think if they don't know the figures, they could be about to walk into a sort of financial abyss. And so I think up until the point that the figures, you've got the confidence. I mean, it's one of those things. I always look at it on the basis that if it's wrong, it's your money. So if you get it wrong, it's going to be an enormously sobering lesson. And I think if you haven't done it before, or you haven't done it sufficiently that you're confident, then I think it'd be a really worthwhile expenditure getting someone to do the numbers. I mean.
Yeah, I do agree, but I think people starting off, that's just another expense for them. So to actually build in a contingency plan is probably cheaper than paying someone.
Yeah, but then I take your point, but then you've also got the issue that if, for sake of argument, if you said to the contractor that there's a £10,000 contingency, are they more likely to go over than if they didn't know there was a contingency?
Do you need to tell them?
You don't, but I suppose this is the thing. If you haven't done it before, then I really would get someone to give you some guide, even if it's just, someone in your group who's done this half a dozen times before, then, bribe them with a coster and pick their brain, because if you get it wrong, it's not, it's not about, if you go and buy a suit without trying it on, you get it home and it doesn't fit, then it's not going to change your life. Well, it will if you had a job interview the following day, but it's not going to change your life. If you buy something that you think you're going to convert into 8 flats, and you've got the numbers really wrong, you've got an almighty problem on your hands. And I think
I totally agree. I do agree. And we would always take advice from other people that have done it before, or absolutely. But if you're dealing with just like, so we've got some people in our group that are, they're thinking about investing in their first buy-to-let property, and they want to refurb, because we always say to people, buy something that you can add some value to, and all this. Not that we give that much advice because we're not that experienced, but but to actually employ someone, or it's all right getting information from a group of like-minded people, but to actually employ someone is another cost. So, but I just think if you plan it in, if you're doing it, just like your own paper sort of calculations, and you plan in, then it just helps. I think it really helps. I agree with you about, because we would, we're a little bit further down the line, maybe we can, we've got sort of people like you that we could come to for advice as well. But I think like newbies starting off, they wouldn't necessarily go and employ someone to help them plan out their.
No, but I suppose the newbie, you would like to think, stroke hope, that their first project wouldn't be a 24 unit commercial to resi conversion. And I think if what they're doing is what you're describing, that they're going to buy a terrace house and they want to make it jolly, add some value and rent it, then I your due diligence might look like you find a builder that you trust and say, I've had an offer accepted on this, or I'm interested in this. Could you come with me and give me your thoughts? And I think, provided you didn't get him to look at 6 a week for you, I think most people are happy to do it, because clearly, if he or she goes and has a look and it all works, that they've got a good chance that they're going to get the work. So it's not entirely wasted. But to not do that and then phone the builder up and say, I've just bought this house. And then they turn up and they say, well, actually, the roof spread, so that's got to come off. And then, you've got dry rot, you've got Japanese knotweed in the garden.
No, we've all heard about them, haven't we? We've all met someone who's done that. So Yeah.
No, I do agree. I agree with what you're saying.
I do. I'm just trying to look across
they're all at different stages. So I was just trying to.
That are on our group. They're all at different stages. So I was just trying to.
I mean, we've done things before where we've gone to auction viewings with people, and they said, we're thinking of bidding on this. There's been a fire in it, or we're thinking of bidding on this, and it just generally looks horrible. Can you have a look at it? And we'll say, well, we'll do our best with whatever you get on an auction viewing, 20 minutes. But you'd like to think in a short period of time, given the quantity that we've seen over the years, that we can tell them whether they should run for the hills or what have you. So, and the other thing I find with the sort of property community is that, unlike many other industries, people seem really happy to help others. It's not, people don't seem to think, well, I'm not going to tell you what I'm doing, it's a massive secret. People seem quite open and happy to collaborate. So I think just, embrace that, I think.
Yeah, I think I agree with you, and it's a really nice environment to be in, actually.
No, I'd agree. Right, as we go, number 5, let's do the next one.
Go for it.
I was just about to say, Graham, that you're a good example of people, helping others and sharing the knowledge tonight, actually. So that's really good.
Oh, they're more than welcome. Oh, did we miss one? Or did I miss one on the slide?
Sorry, it might have been me. No, that's 5.
Oh, maybe I did them in a different order. So this economic cycle one, I just think that a better understanding of the factors that perhaps impact the market would be beneficial. My enormous mistake is I didn't see the 2008 crash coming, and I wish I had, because I would have done something. I would have behaved differently if I had, but I didn't. I've studied it reasonably in depth since, and I'm quietly confident I won't miss another one. But I think if you could have a better understanding, it would pay dividends, because I think it would influence behaviours. And I think it's one of these things to remember that, well, there's that quote from Nigel also. I think it's fair to say there is always going to be a cycle. I know, I think it was Gordon Brown that famously said that he's going to put an end to boom and bust. And then we had a recession. But I also remember, which I think is quite interesting from a property investment point of view, in 2009-ish, maybe early 2010, that the recession was so spectacularly horrible then that there was a good number of people who had formed the opinion that the market would never recover, and therefore some of the property stock, certainly in our area, was so ridiculously cheap, on the basis that even cheap people didn't want to sort of hoover it up wholesale because there was this concern that maybe it would never come back. Now, I accept that there are some areas in the UK where that has held true, but that certainly the vast majority, the numbers are way above what they were pre 2008. And I think some study of that economic cycle would allow you to take advantage in the event that there was another economic hiccup, perhaps in the short to medium term. And I think there's clearly going to be some significant changes to the economy generally over the next 6 to 12 months. I think unemployment is going to be at a level that we probably haven't seen since the early 1980s. And a lot of the economy is driven by confidence. And of course, if you've got 3+ million people out of work, then that sort of general malaise in the economy will translate into results. And so I think there is some opportunity there. And the slide that we actually missed, or which is entirely my fault because I've obviously missed it off, but I had it on my sheet, was that one of my possible errors was to sort of lose sight of the fact that cash is king. And I think certainly in the...
Sorry, it's the next slide, Graham. Sorry.
Oh, okay, let's go backwards. So so onto this one then. That the cash is king, because I think that there are possibly going to be some really good opportunities out there. But I also think that in this, if you look at the sort of 2008 recession, most of the casualties, certainly of the people that I know who were casualties of the recession, was purely down to cash flow and purely down to a lack of ability to get hold of money, which kind of sounds a bit obvious. We didn't have enough money, but it's the sort of at that moment. So you had situations where there were banks perhaps looking at loan to value covenants and perhaps doing margin calls and asking people to sort of remedy breaches and what have you. And as we know now, those loan to value failures were a snapshot in time because those values have well and truly recovered. So if you were in a situation where you could, I suppose for want of a better phrase, ride that storm, that would be the difference in those circumstances between success and failure. And so I think personally, people should try and have more than a rainy day pot if you're running a property company, particularly if you're running a property company and you've got some debt, some mortgage debt. That is my thoughts with that.
So would you be trying to build like a war chest at the moment, or what would be your?
Well, I mean, if we're talking about what I think I did wrong during that period, I think there's probably several things that I wouldn't do similar. I think one is I had all my lending with one lender, which probably isn't a great idea, but no one was kind of thinking along those lines back then. It was almost viewed as a positive because you could sort of lever that relationship. So I suppose that was one thing. I probably wouldn't have admitted it at the time, but with hindsight, the loan to value was probably at a level that could have become sort of quite nervous for people. Certainly in a tighter economic situation, I wouldn't do that again. I think so. I think ultimately you want a situation where you've got at least some stuff that's unencumbered because that gives you options. I think you want some stuff that is very readily, possibly readily saleable. So for sake of argument, if I look at the stuff that I owned back in 2007, 2008, we had lots of blocks of flats, which aren't that easy to turn into cash. But if you'd had half a dozen terrace houses that you could have sold to an owner-occupier, then I would have thought that's a far easier route to get some money in. So I think I'd sort of look at the portfolio in terms of, you know, what could conceivably be liquidated, but I would certainly try and hold some things unencumbered so that you've got options, you know, so that you've got the ability to, you know, either change lender or move some of it, or, you know, take a small loan on something unencumbered and address a loan to value issue on something else, etc., etc. I think it's about maintaining options, and I think having a sort of slush fund of that's a bit more than, you know, what you'd need to spend if a boiler fell off the wall, I think is to be recommended. That's my thoughts anyway.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good. I was talking to a big developer who nearly went bust in 2008, and one of the reasons he nearly went bust was it's sort of almost the opposite of what you're saying, actually. So he had quite a lot of equity in his deals, and he then became a target for the bank because they knew they would get their money. So he nearly went bust, even though he had lots of equity, because the banks were repossessing because they knew they'd get their money. When he said it's almost the reverse in actual fact, that if you've got a high loan to value, they're actually less attractive to the lender because they might not actually get all their money because it's sort of highly geared. I
think there's all sorts of arguments with this. I mean, I know somebody whose portfolio is utterly underwater, and they didn't get so much as a phone call during the recession, and clearly the bank took the view, well, you know, if you're happy to service the debt, that's better than we'd be able to do if we had to take it. I think that's true. I think the other thing, you talk about someone who's got development sites and things, I think some of the casualties from the recession are on the basis that the values of those sites, when they were revalued as a consequence of the recession, they were written down so heavily that would force a problem with a loan to value covenant. I think particularly if they were perhaps at a pre-planning stage, I think that could have been a pretty dangerous place to be. But I don't think necessarily the circumstances that we had in 2008 will repeat themselves. I think broadly the banks are better capitalised than they were. But I think it would be silly not to learn any lessons from that period.
Yeah.
With you know, the economic change that's likely.
Yeah.
And I think the other point in terms of gearing is you know, there is likely to be, possibly, there may be some tax changes coming down the line which may may impact landlords or limited companies. And so, you know, if you're really highly geared and your margin is wafer thin, then those sort of changes are they could make a profoundly negative impact in terms of what you're doing. And I think it's about that we would talk on the slide before, an awareness of the economic factors, and regardless of what you think the November budget might include, I think it's fair comment to say that the government has spent an awful lot of money, and at some juncture in the future, they're going to want us to start sending them some again. So I think a reserve is sensible.
Yeah, I think that's really good, and the point about tax changes, I think, is absolutely right as well, Graham.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think I am right on that one.
I don't think there's any choice, really.
Right. Well, I don't think so. Right, on to the next one. So, this one, I don't think I've made this mistake myself. I've probably gone the other way because I'm a bit of an exam junkie. So I think there's been 2 years since I left university where I haven't sat professional exams. So I am that saddo.
Wow.
But I like doing it because clearly there's a learning element to it. I like doing it because there's a barometer in terms of you must have got to a certain level, otherwise they wouldn't have sent you the certificate. And I like doing it because it sort of broadens your skill set. But I'm one of these people, I don't think any learning is wasted. And so I wholeheartedly encourage people to do whatever learning and development that they feel that they might enjoy. and I think it is truly worthwhile to do. And I think it's also fair to say that it opens doors, without a doubt. And so you might find that you get access to opportunities that maybe you wouldn't have had before, or you meet people. I mean, certainly as our service offering as a firm has developed as a consequence of the skills and abilities that we've got, then doubtless we now act for clients that we would probably never have met if we hadn't started doing X, Y, and Z. But I think people, I think a lot of people, when they start a business and they see some success, there's just, they become slightly blinkered to that and then just think, well, we'll just repeat. But I think there is a requirement to continually develop. I think there is also a requirement to continually invest in yourself, because what you actually earn your living for might not last you a lifetime. And my example for that is I used to work with a guy who he was actually a director of an estate agency that I worked at. It wasn't my one, that I worked at, and he decided that he was going to leave in 2006 to go and train to be a home inspector, because the home information packs were coming out and he was going to make his fortune then. Well, he might have done if he'd done it all in 4.5 months, but clearly that avenue just evaporated. And so clearly there is a requirement for him to do something different. So investing in your skill set for no other reason than that is that you always have the ability, hopefully, to be able to earn a pound note and do something that there is a demand for.
So does that include, I mean, you said about 2 years that you hadn't set exams. So I think you're an exam junkie, Graham, which is all very well. Does that education extend to sort of non-professional sort of exams? So for instance, would you look at your sort of mindset, your sort of motivation, the sort of the softer side of softer skills?
I haven't, so maybe that's the failing. No, I haven't. I tend to find that it's going to be property related, because I need to be really into it to do it. Because if you're going to come home from a day at work and bury your head in the books and what have you, you've got to want to do it. I think it's a bit like going to the gym, isn't it? You've got to get in the zone because otherwise it's easy to do everything but. So I suppose if it was, if you said, well, why don't you go and do GCSE Mandarin, then I would probably struggle with that. I mean, because I don't know any Mandarin, but equally because I don't want it bad enough, so I probably wouldn't be able to commit the effort that is required. It's back to that, you've got to be passionate about what you're doing. So if I wanted to do it, I'd quite happy to dedicate whatever hours are required to do it. But if I didn't, I'd probably never get there. I think that's probably fair to say.
I know, it's interesting. Because you're certainly a very well qualified individual. I think we can see that from all your qualifications. I'm quite envious of all your qualifications, actually, Graham.
It's funny, actually. I said we did a job in it was up your way, actually. It was Buckinghamshire a couple of months ago, and there was the surveyor on the other side. He said to me when we met on a site visit, and obviously he'd seen my qualifications after my name on my email footer and all that sort of thing, and he said to me, I don't know why you put them on. He said, I wouldn't do that. And I said, why not? And he said, well, people are going to think you're really expensive. They just won't use you.
Well, just to, I'll just go to the very first slide. So that's a long list. I mean, I don't know what half of those even mean, if I'm completely honest, Graham.
Well, if you want the pod to talk, I mean, the first one's obviously it's my first degree. Yeah. The CBuild is Chartered Building Engineer. Then it's member of the Chartered Association of Building Engineers. It's member of the Chartered Institute of Building, associate of the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors, associate of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, fellow of the Faculty of Party Wall Surveyors, fellow of the Institute of Party Wall Surveyors, Fellow of the Property Consultant Society, member of the Guild of Incorporated Surveyors, member of the Residential Property Surveyors Association, member of the Institute of Domestic Energy Assessors, member of the Institute of Fire Safety Managers, member of the Party Wall Academy, member of the Institute of Training and Occupational Learning, associate of the Institute of Residential Property Management, certificate in mortgage advice and practice, financial planning certificate, member of the Life Insurance Association, diploma in domestic energy assessment, diploma in Green Deal assessment, certificate in domestic on construction energy assessment, certificate in residential lettings and management, and certificate of practice in estate agency.
I feel like I ought to clap, really.
I'm just going to clap.
Well, very well done.
done.
Very well done.
And to remember them.
And I mean,
Yeah.
you must get invited to so many Christmas parties. But I do like the I do like the thing about investing in yourself. I mean, I tend to do, since leaving corporate life, I tend to do more personal development, I must admit, rather than sort of professional development. But I absolutely agree with you about investing in yourself.
And it's massively rewarding. I think there's a huge feel good in it. I mean, that might just be me as an exam junkie, but litigation. This slightly plays to my experience. I've had 2 or 3 litigations. My lesson to others for these is that I understand why people may want to litigate. I understand that people will take a principled position. If that's, you said you'd do X, I said I'd do Y, I've done Y, but you haven't done X, and so now I want to do something about it. And as linear as that. And actually, certainly 2 of my litigations were exactly that. One was I exchanged contracts to sell a building to a guy, and it was a conditional exchange, and the only condition on the exchange was that I had to provide a building control sign-off. It was a conversion into flats. I had to provide building control certificate, completion certificate. That's all we had to do. And then on the basis that I provided the completion certificate, the buyer had to complete within 14 days of me providing that certificate. Sounds easy enough. He didn't complete. So we moved to hang on to his deposit, rescind the contract and do something different. He decided that it would be more fun to try and suggest that some of the dialogue up until the contract suggested that we didn't mean what we said in the contract, and etc., etc. Anyway, the whole thing turned into a bit of a bun fight. But what more concerningly is that this was literally about 3 months before the financial crash. And so it was a significant pain, because what started off as 1.1 million wouldn't have been anywhere close by the time we'd got through that. But so I think my lesson with litigation is that you need to understand, I'm not saying don't do it, and I think it has its role. And I think certainly for some companies, I think reputationally, you probably have to have, a couple of goes in a lifetime, so that, people don't think that they can just do what they like with you. So I understand all of those arguments, but I think the takeaway that I'd like you to have is that where it ends up is never where it starts, in my experience. So what you might at the outset think, well, it's black and white. He said he'd do this, I said I'd do that, he hasn't. And so, clearly I'll win, because by the time you go through a year and a half with solicitors and, mediation and hearings and all the rest of it, the story at the end is invariably a sort of hybrid of what happened at the start. And therefore, if you're basing your chances of success, or what you think the judge is likely to say based on your understanding of events at the beginning, that's unlikely to be an accurate synopsis by the time you've all been through the ringer. And so I think, consider it with some caution, because litigation is really expensive. There is no doubt about that at all. I mean, the one that we did in 2007, I think if you just look at what we were paying on an hourly rate then as against what current rates are, that litigation would probably be double now. It is expensive, and I think some of these alternatives, the alternative dispute resolution, sort of mediation and negotiation and all these sort of things, really, really worthwhile having a look at if you can resolve disputes that way, because aside from anything else, they're so mentally draining and they take up so much of your time and brain space, and they're not going to be enjoyable. You might like watching these dramas on the TV, but believe me, when you're one of the parties, they're far less exciting than when you're watching from the sidelines and cheering on. So I would I'm not saying I wouldn't do it again. In the right circumstances I would, but I suppose it's just to have an understanding that they're generally quite bruising processes.
I suppose if you go back to what we talked about earlier in terms of being passionate, if you're passionate about something, you'd be potentially passionate that you're in the right and that something is wrong, and you'd want to sort of correct it. Really, I definitely see how that happens.
Yeah, I think that's the driver. In fact, that's been the drive. I've been there 3 times, and that's been the drive for all of them. That I've done what I said I'd do, you haven't, and as a consequence of you not, I've sustained a loss, or am going to, and therefore, we'd like to do something about it. But it's not that black and white. Once you think, it's just. Yeah.
So the quote there about being ruined twice, once when they won and once when they lost.
Well, that one's more. It's more about the only winners are the lawyers and all that sort of thing. But I think lawyers can add terrific value to these sort of situations in the same way that mediators can, because effectively you've got someone who's going to assess your issue, not from because what you really want in your own mind is you want someone to go, yeah, you're right, Graham, that's awful, that should never happen, don't worry, we'll sort it out. But what you actually really want, and I suppose what the effective ones would do, is tell you that how that process is likely to play out based on their years of experience, and how similar cases have been interpreted by the judges, and then actually explore how you might avoid it rather than sort of run head first to it. And as I say, mediation and things is quite common now. I mean, we do quite a lot of dispute resolution as part of, some of the party wall work we do, and some of my colleagues deal with boundary disputes and things. But as I say, if you can successfully mediate these things, you'll never know the pain that you've averted by closing the thing down. But just take my word for it, you'll be pleased that you have.
So that's really good advice. I think. Obviously, I can feel your pain, Graham. So
it's all part of life, isn't it? It's
No, that's good. Very good.
So next we've got. We're almost there. You'll be pleased to know.
Oh, hold on a second. Is that right?
Yeah, that one. Yeah. This, as I say, I suppose my takeaway with this one is the sort of lessons of 2008, 2009. And I think, not all developments and not everything that you do in business is going to be a runaway success. But I think it's really important to, continually analyse and learn from what you did, whether that's good, bad or indifferent, both in terms of what you could do differently and the things that you might want to be attracted to in the future or run a mile from. I find it odd, the number of people that perhaps haven't heeded that lesson. And certainly if you look at, my own experience and that of a lot of the clients that we had at our estate agency in sort of 2007-8, their loan to values were really high, principally because that was coming off the back of 110% mortgages from the Northern Rock and a same day remortgage from Paragon. So arguably it wasn't their fault, they just kept having money sent to them. But of course that unraveled fairly quickly post 2008, and so I find it odd now where you go to some of these property meets and people are cheering each other because they've raised a certain amount of money or they've got more than all of their money out of a deal. And I think to myself, I can see why there's an advantage to that, because it's going to enable you to do something else. But you don't really want a situation where you do that for everything that you own, because then actually you've created a situation that is not really any different to that which destroyed thousands of people, 10 or 12 years ago. So, the other thing in terms of these property meets, you can learn lots of things from each other, because of course everyone's done different things, and someone might have found a way to navigate through something that's meant that their experience was far more successful than yours. But you could still learn from that. We should learn from that.
It's interesting you say that, actually, because so sort of our property meeting, it is purely just that. In terms of in normal times when we physically meet, it's just very informal. It's people sharing what they're doing, the issues they've got, and what they've learned just amongst like-minded people. So it's really interesting what you said, that, because it's sort of
I've seen people on LinkedIn and things, and they say, oh, we've just had the remortgage done on 12 Acacia Avenue or whatever it is they've done, and they say we've only got £1,000 left in there, and you think effectively you've got a fully geared investment, unless you're saying that the value that you've added is so exponential that you've created an enormous buffer. But that is certainly not the case, and particularly when you look at HMOs, where people they buy it on one basis and then try and get it valued on another and then take all their money out, and their equity relies on the fact that it's valued in a certain way. And as Sam was saying earlier, that's they don't often get the choice which way it's done. And in a tighter economy, you can guess which one they will use.
Yeah. It's back to the whole commercial lending, as you say, that Sam was talking about. I think if you sort of go back to what you're saying earlier about, and I completely subscribe to that. You make your money when you buy. So if you can buy well, add value, you can. You can do well. I mean, I think that's a model that a lot of people follow, the sort of buy, refurbish, refinance type model.
Yeah. Okie doke. And then there's the last one next, but as I say, they're in no particular order. This one, I just think it's nice to that people sort of reflect on their achievements, and sort of at a certain point in time, stop the hamster wheel and just reflect on what they've done. I think, I know a number of people who are, certainly beyond retirement age, who still are very active in property, which is great. But I think they accept and acknowledge that they do it for fun rather than because they have to, and that is a different mindset. And so I think if you're going to put all this effort into creating a business or doing developments or whatever it is, I think when you get to the stage that it pays the bills, or you've achieved whatever goal it was that you set out, I think you should pat yourself on the back. And I wouldn't want you to sort of miss that because you're just in a routine that you're just keeping on going, because then you question, well, what was it for? So I suppose that is my parting message to you all, that you should pat yourselves on the back when appropriate.
I think it's the whole thing about celebrating your successes. Well, one, recognizing your successes and taking the time out to celebrate. Yeah, I absolutely agree, and I think it's certainly something we don't do as well as perhaps we should.
The thing is, I think that a lot of people that are successful at this effectively adopt this whole delayed gratification model, whereby all your spare cash you throw in to do whatever you're doing, and then that will fund the next one, and then that will pay the builders, and that's what we're doing, etc., etc. But I think because it's I suppose that it's a marathon, not a sprint, because people tend to do it for a number of years, I think you do really get into the fact it becomes a way of life, and you run a real risk that you don't acknowledge at some point that you've made probably more significant sacrifices than others to achieve what it is that you've achieved.
No, I think you're absolutely right, Graham.
We'll be out dancing in the streets of St Albans tonight, and Celebrating your successes.
We're in Broadstairs.
We're actually in Broadstairs, but
We're in Broadstairs.
Yes.
The outside Morelli's.
yeah, we're
That's
not
it.
far from Morelli's. Yeah. No, that's. Was that your last slide? Let me just check.
That is the last bit, but just the if anyone's got any questions or anyone wants to get in touch or shout or complain or whatever, then there we have it.
That will litigate, maybe.
That's it. Yeah, if anyone wants to kick off number 4, then I'll post an address for service on the slides. Yeah.
No, that was excellent, Graham. I thought it's very thought provoking. As some of it sort of swims against the general tide of the latest sort of trends and fashions in property, and I thought it was really well structured, and I appreciate all your work you put into that, and I appreciate you also being so honest. I think that's always sort of really lovely, because we all know not everything goes completely to plan, so every time. So that's been really good. I will give people the opportunity if they've got any questions.
Yeah.
Not shy.
Graham, this is Seamus. Is there anything you don't know?
Yeah, well, they say you don't know what you don't know. There's lots I don't know. Every day's a day for learning. There's lots of things I'd like to know much more about.
With those qualifications, you look like a one-stop shop.
Well, I mean, we carry quite a broad suite of services. I mean, I suppose the work that I do is quite varied. I suppose for that reason that I've qualified in a number of areas. But there's plenty of brainier people than me out there. There's always something to learn, and things always change. So you want to augment that knowledge. So there's always something else.
I don't think I've ever seen anyone so qualified in my life.
Oh. Thank you very much.
You've got to have picked up something.
Yeah, well, I'd like to think I've retained at least some of what I've learned. Otherwise, it would have been a spectacular waste. But having said that, as I say, I thoroughly enjoy it. I like studying and I like doing exams, which does make me a bit weird. The other thing that people say I must be really weird for is I like doing the professional interview bit. When you sit in front of a panel of three or four people, and they spend a couple of hours trying to find something you don't know, and then really drill down on it and highlight that nothing at all. I actually quite like those as well, which I think probably makes me broadly unique.
I think I wouldn't do it, but I think what you've done has created an extremely focused approach to lots of different topics, which you might not have done if you hadn't sat the exams, if you see what I mean. So yeah. I'm it doesn't count for much, but I'm impressed.
Well, thank you very much. No, it certainly does count. Thank you.
Yeah, good question. Thanks, Seamus. Anybody else?
Very kind.
No. That's excellent, Graham. So thank you very much. I tried to do my best with your slides.
No, you did much better than I would have done. So that was super. Thank you.
I was trying to be your glamorous assistant, or not so glamorous.
My dolly dealer. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. So there's great. So Graham's details are there. If Graham's demonstrated how extensive his property knowledge is. So he's always a very good contact. He's somebody I contact as well. So that's all very good. We are just slightly overrunning, which I apologise for. I'm just going to see if I can get out of this and go into my slides. So just bear with me a second.